I was going to pick up on Carolina. I completely agree. I think what we're going to see from the SNB is quite a cautious statement, a very cautious message. If you look at the recent statistics that were released by the Statistic Office, we call them the SECO in the markets, they clearly said that there were concerns about the export sector. They highlighted 2011 as a potential fragile outlook for the economy, once again mentioning exports. I think the SNB has clearly stated that they are there on the downside in Euro Swiss, and I don't think anything is going to change. They're still going to be talking about intervention, and it's going to be quite cautious overall.
Okay, I just want to move the conversation back to the United States and focus on when the market refocuses on the US and its issues. Rahul writes in and says, I think when you look at the equity markets, we've been forming a very significant head and shoulders in the Dow since 1998. I am targeting sub 5,000 levels on the Dow. And he cites various underlying economic problems that he thinks will support that technical call. America is going to have these problems come home to roost pretty soon, isn't it?
Yes, but with a delayed reaction, and in the meantime, I have to say that the problems in Europe are probably greater than in the United States. And as I said, in the US, what will happen? Say the S&P revisits around 900, 950. In other words, we drop another 10% from this level, or say 15%. You can be sure they'll have another stimulus package and another monetary easing with Mr. Bernanke at the Fed. And so economically, I'm not particularly optimistic, but I would say that the economy has probably bottomed out, that we're not below the March-May 2009 level. From there we have recovered somewhat also in terms of industrial production. But in terms of stock markets, I don't think we're going to revisit 666 on the S&P on March 6, 2009.
How can they have another stimulus package at this point, Mark? I mean, what have they got? Near 10%?
Well, they can send each household a check for, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000. They can cut tax.
And that's,
I mean, there are some economies in the US that claim that deficits don't matter, so why have taxation in the first place? You just borrow money.
I disagree. I mean, I think up to now Europe has been a bigger basket case than the US, but if we look just beyond the next 6 months and 12 months, Europe is actually trying to do something. The 2020 strategy is good. It's about competitiveness. It's about bringing down labor moves and so on. And I think we actually had a turning point. I think inside the next 3 months, focus will be back on the U.S. You have the federal states budget start July 1st. They will be cutting across the board. If you take California in itself, 80%, 60 to 80% of all their expenses are fixed because of the legislation in the U.S. So the federal states is going to be on a massive attack. It will be also politically under the scope because of the midterm election. That's number one. Number two, the slowdown from the U.S. consumers in real-time data is immense. I mean, it is very, very big. It's falling faster in terms of negative growth than it was during the 2008 crisis, number two. And thirdly, clearly Obama wants to just print more money, and the business model of just printing more money is going to run out of time very soon. I don't think there's more room for it. Whereas in the US, you have the German model, the Swiss model, where you go for more fiscal restraint. Obviously, it all means, and I think what we have to agree on is that the next 5 years is going to be anemic growth. There's going to be no growth in the world. You're seeing right now, if you look at forward freight rates, they're collapsing. Bulk rates is down 20, 30%, 3 to 6 months out. This is not a coincidence, all this happening at the same time. So focus is coming back on the U.S., and that's also why you can be slightly more bullish on, you have to be less bullish on the dollar overall, in my opinion.
Less bullish on the dollar, more bullish on Europe, again.
Well, I'm actually going to puzzle everything together here. If we were going to see equities come under substantial pressure into the coming few months, I think everyone would then refocus on the Fed, and the Fed would do more QE. And if that was going to happen, I think the dollar would come under pressure. And I think that's how you can puzzle everything. Now, whether it happens or not, because it's a bit of a disaster scenario to a certain extent, it's a scenario where equities come under substantial pressure, is the Fed forced to step up, and as I said, the dollar comes under pressure. Whether it happens or not, I think we'll be able to judge towards the summer, because liquidity will draw out. It's typical of the month of August, and let's see what happens.
Okay, Mark, I was reading your last note. You were much exercised about the protests and demonstrations going on in Thailand, as you would be, obviously being located there. But I thought what was interesting is how you were trying to draw a comparison with that and also the unrest that we're seeing on the streets of Greece, France around the pensions, other places where the public, quite frankly, are fed up, and the austerity being imposed by governments is the last thing they want to see at this point. By extension, is there any chance that we're going to see these kind of demonstrations in North America at some point if Washington finally cracks down on its budget?
Well, basically we have the tea parties already, and they are peaceful at the present time. But I mean, I travel a lot and I talk to rich people and to poor people. I've never met anyone who is happy with the governments the way they conduct the business nowadays. The well-to-do people think that the government provides bad services and will tax them too heavily, and the poor people feel that government employees are overpaid and that there is a bureaucracy and that the government doesn't look anymore after the people's interest but after its own interest. So everybody is unhappy, and I think that governments have become like a cancer. They have expanded within the economic system and they absorb far too much out of the economic pie. They should actually all contract massively. That's why I was so much against the Keynesian intervention in the United States and elsewhere. I think the basic problem is too much intervention, too much regulation. You look at America. Which were the two biggest bankruptcies? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Government-sponsored enterprises. Whatever the government touches is usually done worse than if it's done by the private sector. That is a basic principle of the market economy of the capitalistic system.
I think